Hey, welcome back to the Backyard Professor recorded videos. I am the Backyard Professor. I have with me again my good friend Colby Townsend. Colby, how you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
I am doing well. It's good to see you again. It's been at least 15 years?
Something like that.
We haven't aged a day. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's enough of that malarkey. Hey, tonight we have a really wonderful discussion that Colby and I are going to have, and it's going to be on the biblical prophecies of the Book of Mormon. We are going to focus on Isaiah 29, the sealed book, and the unlearned man who cannot read a sealed book. However, I would like to express an experience I had. I have said this in a previous video. I think it's already been a year ago. But I would like to add one clarification. I became good friends with John Twetness at Farms. And he sat down one time with me in his office and he told me that he had done some research on Ezekiel 37, the sticks of Joseph and the sticks of Judah. And he had discovered through an analysis of the Hebrew as well as the ancient historical and he claimed, if I remember correctly, he said he had some archaeological basis for saying this also, that it actually was not a prophecy of the Book of Mormon. Now, when I expressed that in my Radio Free Mormon interview, when I first came back into the broadcasting world, thanks to Radio Free Mormon, Dan Peterson of Interpreter, the former editor of the Farms Review of Books, took serious exception to me dissing John Twetness and bad-mouthing the scriptures and the church, etc. And yet he never watched the video. So I just want to say something real quick, and then Colby will jump on this. I did not diss John Twetness, and John was not being antagonistic about Ezekiel 37 not being a prophecy. He said, I was just simply looking at the actual meaning of the text, what scholars use the fancy word exegesis or exegesis. I've heard it pronounced both ways. So that's what John was. He wasn't looking to ruffle feathers. He wasn't looking to insult the brethren or anything. He was just doing his scholarly thing, and he happened to share that information with me. I asked him for a copy of the paper, and he said he was prohibited from publishing it, so he couldn't give me a copy. To this day, so far as we're aware, it's never been published, but it is noted that he had written a paper on Ezekiel 37, and I suspect that's the paper. I have no idea what happened to it. But so that was one instance that kind of began to pique my curiosity again into these these claimed biblical prophecies of either Joseph Smith or the Book of Mormon or events in church history. Colby and I were talking a while back, and he basically did what John told me. He said, well, I've looked into that a bit, and I mean, nothing overly exhaustive, but Isaiah 29, the whole early Mormon use, that experience with the Isaiah 29, Joseph Smith, the unlearned man, I cannot read a sealed book with Charles Anthon, etc., that has been told not only differently through time, but Colby has found yet again realistically a more accurate historical idea on what actually happened, and that's what we want to talk about today. Did I word that right, Colby? I'm not trying to get you in hot water either. It's just when you were telling me about Isaiah 29, I said, "Oh gosh, I'd like to have you on the show and have you talk about it," and you agreed. So here we are.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I don't know if I necessarily discovered this. It's just, I have friends that I've talked about this with that also do, work on early Mormonism, and they're just like, yeah, no, that's totally, I'm totally on board with that. Yeah, no, one of the interesting things is, the Isaiah 29, it just in the context of the Book of Mormon, is pretty clearly revised away from the King James text to be about Martin Harris's experience traveling to New York and trying to get someone to look at the characters on the plate and, for himself to feel vindicated in supporting the project. So
Right.
there's a couple of things going on there. Martin Harris not only wants to help Joseph Smith with his project and wants to sort of vindicate the project in that way, but he also needs to convince himself and his wife and her family, and which is his family. They were first cousins,
And neighbors.
and some neighbors. Basically people who thought that he was being ripped off and used for publishing the book. So he goes in 1828 in the spring out to New York City, and meets with a bunch of different professors, and a couple of them say you should go meet with Charles Anthon. So he goes to Charles Anthon, and in the earliest versions of the story, he goes with just a character's document. That's all that Anthon was aware of when he retold the story, and he told it in different ways, 2 different times in the 1840s. But he only ever mentioned just a character's document, never signing a document saying, yeah, there was a translation also, and the translation was correct. So the earliest versions of the story just have Martin Harris, going, meeting with them, showing a character's document. And that's about it. And that's pretty much what the Book of Mormon indicates. The Isaiah 29 is changed in 2 Nephi 27 to be more specifically. It's added. It's the most different text of Isaiah in the Book of Mormon. It changed. There's just a dramatic change to Isaiah 29 and 2 Nephi 27. And so, as far as like the Book of Mormon shows, and as far as the earliest accounts of Martin Harris's trip go, he takes a character's document, and it by all accounts, it didn't seem to really go that well. But for Martin Harris, he felt that it was proof, that it was good enough evidence for him to keep working with Smith, and so he kept doing so. And
so just I'm not trying to interrupt you. I apologize.
No, you're good. Yeah.
So you're saying second Nephi 27.
Mm-hmm.
This is obviously based on Isaiah 29. Once you look at it, yeah.
But
yet it is quite a bit different than Isaiah 29.
Oh, it is quite a bit. I mean, it's dramatically different.
Dialed into, almost as it were, dressed up so that he could indicate this as an actual prophecy, perhaps. You think that's what he must have been doing?
Yeah, I think that is, what happens, because if you're just going with the historical chronology, you have Martin Harris going in 1828. Lost manuscript happens that year. This text, 2 Nephi 27, is part of the final dictation of the Book of Mormon. At the beginning of the dictation process, they start in Harmony, Pennsylvania, in Mosiah 1.
Yes,
right, or whatever. Yeah, or whatever it might have been. There's some complications there of what chapter they started on, but somewhere around Mosiah, and then they go all the way to the end, and then they move. So Smith and Cowdery and Emma, they move to Fayette, New York, to the Whitmer farm, and then that's where Smith dictates First Nephi through Words of Mormon. So Second Nephi 27 is toward the end of that.
End of it all. Okay.
So he's had time to consider that, and there's time to have all of that sink in. But that experience that Martin Harris had happened a year before Isaiah 29 is dictated.
Now, see this is why I wanted you to talk about this, because it's just those little things like that. Mm-hmm. We are so used to just simply reading through the Book of Mormon. And okay, well, this was dictated first and Second Nephi, and then Words of Mormon, and then on and on and on. And yet, it's not that simple. Yeah. We think everything is just simply step by step chronologically. Mm-hmm. And so this Second Nephi 27, I'm just trying to make sure I'm clear here.
Yeah.
Happened. This was a year after Martin Harris's experience. Did I get that right?
That's right. Yeah.
That, to me, that seems like an important detail to grasp.
Yeah, and
very good.
Important detail too, and this is noted in Larry Morris's book, Documentary History of the Book of Mormon. It's a fantastic book. It's affordable. I recommend everyone having it. It goes through all the different stages of the production history of the Book of Mormon and gives you all the sources in chronological order.
Oh,
it's a
cool.
fantastic book. It's one of my favorites in Mormon studies. But yeah, in there, Morris notes a handful of really important things, either in his, his own introduction and commentary, or just in the sources themselves. Martin Harris indicated at one point, I would have to double check when this was, but it's in Morris's book. Martin Harris indicated at one point that Smith was the first one to note that Martin Harris had fulfilled prophecy of Isaiah. So,
Smith.
Yeah, Smith was the first one to point it out, and it was on Harris's return that Smith told him, "You just fulfilled Isaiah 29."
Oh,
So,
would that not convince a man like Martin Harris, who saw a deer thinking it was Jesus and talking to him for a 2-mile walk on a country road? Would that not convince Martin Harris, this guy's for real? That is interesting.
Yeah.
So, you just fulfilled prophecy. Yeah, sure, Joe. Yeah, look at this, Isaiah 29.
Look at it. It says it right here in verses 11 and 12.
Very interesting.
11 and 12 are so important
here. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, Smith is telling Martin Harris that a year before he dictates 2nd Nephi 27. So Smith is, the first to sort of point it out. He's the first to sort of walk that Martin Harris through that interpretation of Isaiah 29. And then once the text is actually dictated and it's revising Isaiah 29, there's been plenty of time for that kind of change. So it's the most different text from the King James of any of the quotations of the Bible, and it's really fascinating to dig into it. So you have that. And then the Book of Mormon gets published. The story, there are a handful of documents where Martin Harris has told the story to different newspapers about his experience going out east. So we have some of that documentation. None of the documentation until 1838 claims that that Martin Harris took not only a character document, but also a translation of the characters. And that really important note that gets repeated all the time in the scholarship, that Martin Harris asks Charles Anthon for a little written note affirming that the translation is correct, all of that kind of stuff. That
sounds vaguely familiar.
It does, and we'll get to that in a second. Yeah, well, that first appears in the 1838 history in Smith's official history.
Now, this is interesting too. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I've just recently done, just a couple of weeks ago, through the research of my good friend Paul Osborne, who has found some actual interesting materials on the first vision, and I did a video on that where the significant, and I had wonderful slides so that you can systematically see the difference between the first vision accounts, the 1832, the 1835, and interestingly enough, the 1838. Seems to me like, now you're bringing this up again in this same year with this event. 1838 appears to me to be a really important year for Joseph Smith trying to solidify, as it were, maybe coordinate all the events together into a valid chronology. 1838 was a big year for him for that, a revision year.
Yes. No, you're exactly right. And it's important for a handful of reasons. The whole issue of the excommunications and people leaving Mormonism in 1836 and 7 in the Kirtland era, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
With all of that, it was a big shift. And when Smith is writing this new history in 1838, most of the original people who were part of the church, like Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and others, the Whitmers, they had either been excommunicated or left. So Smith is writing this earlier history and doing it without a lot of those early members there. And
oh, how interesting.
yeah, and so
I never thought of it that way.
yeah, so he's doing exactly what you said. He is really trying to solidify that history, trying to
Without,
really get it down.
almost as if it were without interference.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not trying
Yeah.
to get accusatory against Joseph Smith, but
No.
makes sense that that helps him solidify after
Yeah.
such a debacle of the Kirtland Bank.
Yeah.
I have to do something to shore up my authority.
And I also get to sort of define what that history is, right? So this is more than just sort of memory. I think Stephen Harper's work is really important for understanding the first vision and 18 and all those different accounts. But this is more than just memory. This is also about like the historical situation and the rhetorical purposes that someone at the head of an institution needs to serve the institution. And so he's creating this new history in 1838 that isn't going to necessarily have interference from from other people who were there. And it gets fascinating for this because the account of Martin Harris, which is in basically first person in the 1838 history, it's like Martin Harris wrote it. Martin Harris didn't write it.
He wasn't even there.
Yeah. And it's there that we first get the historical detail about there being a translation along with the characters, and Anthon signing off on the translation saying it's accurate, and then after hearing about angels tearing it up. And there's kind of a in Smith's history, there's sort of a trajectory where antagonists don't believe in angels. For his first vision account, he gets pushed back because there aren't any ministering angels, there aren't any visitations from God, that kind of thing. Anthon says basically that same thing. It's almost like it's a very similar character in this narrative. None of them believe in heavenly visitations and that kind of thing. But the problem for this is that all of the earlier accounts from before 1838 don't indicate that there was a translation, that Anthon did sign off on something. In Anthon's accounts, he basically just sticks to his story that, no, I saw, a wealthy farmer that I felt was getting swindled. That was his,
that was his response. Yeah, it was.
And he wanted to, suggest to him not to, but he could tell that Martin Harris really wanted to believe this and that he really wanted to go back with, proper kind of information to be able to move forward with what he was doing with Smith. So you have that. And I realized, and a few other historians have realized this too, it's not like I discovered it or I'm alone or whatever, but I just realized that in reading all these sources that sounded very familiar, that signing off on a translation, particularly because Charles Anthon was a really good scholar of his day. He was one of the leading scholars at the universities in the United States.
So was Mitchell. Wasn't Mitchell one of the other scholars?
Yep. But Mitchell believed that Anthon would be the one to actually look at it. And Anthon, just like everybody else in the U.S., didn't know Egyptian. If it was Egyptian, as it sort of implies that, okay, he knew how to translate. He could tell that this was a correct translation. It's Reformed Egyptian, right?
Yeah.
He wouldn't have been able to sign off
exactly
on whether or not it was a correct translation.
Now bells are ringing.
Yeah, he didn't know the language. So that's really important. But the fact that the story, the 1838 history says that, he signs off on this paper, that paper is lost, it gets torn up, basically makes a ghost version of that moving forward in the traditional Mormon history, where basically that does exist. It's just that we don't have it because Anthon tore it up, right? And the important thing is Smith is rewriting this history in 1838, and only 3 years before this experience, he had almost that exact experience with the Book of Abraham and the Egyptian papyri. So in that period, in that context, in Kirtland, he's engaging with Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler wants to move not just the papyri but also the mummies, and so there's some going back and forth trying to see.
He's got some incentive also,
right? There's some incentive there, and when Smith is convinced to move forward with the full purchase, and he has financial backers that come in and spend the money, really expensive money, on the mummies and the papyri, his first sort of move is to get his grammar book, to get all the different documents. And this is an area where David Golding and a handful of other scholars who have worked on the Egyptian grammar and those kinds of things done way more with this than I have. But his first move is to actually go back to some of his documents, go back to some of his revelations, bring them out. He actually tells, I think, Oliver Cowdery or one of the others to go get one of those books. And once he has those and he's looking over the papyri, that's when he says, oh, this is Abraham, this is Joseph, right? That's what's going on in these texts. And he's translating the Egyptian on the papyri. Right. Michael Chandler says, you are an accomplished translator. This is amazing. He writes a little on a piece of paper. He writes sort of an affidavit kind of thing, saying, I've witnessed Joseph Smith translating from the papyri. He is a wonderful translator. He knows what he's doing. Yeah. And so as Joseph Smith,
I watched that it happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so as after Joseph Smith gets the mummies and the papyri, and he's showing them for 25 cents a person. As people are coming in, he's able to actually show their accounts of Smith and his mother, showing that little note from Michael Chandler, saying that he knows how to translate. He had an accurate translation. That happens.
And from the guys who had the mummies and the papyri, for Pete's sake. Of course, I know what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
That appears to me to be the spirit of why they're pushing that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And just having that little document, adds a whole bunch of credibility, right?
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to me that, you have that happen in 1835. You don't have any accounts in the story about Martin Harris's, up to this point. You don't have any accounts up in the story of Martin Harris's meeting with Charles Anthon about any kind of translation or a little affidavit saying, yes, this is a correct translation, until after Smith himself directly has that experience with Michael Chandler and sees the utility of having that little document as
very interesting. See, I've accused you before in previous videos of doing fantastic detective work. I get to do it again. Yeah, that little connection there. True. It's almost a historical nitpick, but it's huge. This is significant because of the chronology. The time, like I say, 1838. Man, that was the year Joseph. I almost get the impression, Colby, that Joseph Smith is in almost a do or die, and I'm not going to die. I'm going to show these guys I am who I say I am. I have this authority. Yes, these visitations of angels, this really happened to me. In fact, it wasn't just the Son after all. It was God the Father and his Son. And, I mean, it just seems to me like he's really trying to, after all the ridiculous bad swamp press from Kirtland, this begins to make a boatload of sense. Interesting.
Yeah. So I think that's really important for understanding it, because it is, like you said, it is kind of a little historical nitpick, but that is doing historical work. And in the Book of Mormon, it's more just focused on, well, the learned isn't going to be able to read it, so the learned one is going to say, bring the book to me, and the unlearned say, well, I can't read it, I can't bring it because it's sealed. Right? That becomes like so important to understanding the Book of Mormon on its own terms. That's in the text. But within the tradition of reading the Book of Mormon, the 1838 history becomes the lens that the text of the Book of Mormon is read through. And it's really crucial, to understand that little detail about Anthon, ripping up a little piece of paper, most likely didn't happen. That's probably based
on what an effect that would have. I mean, wow. It's very, again, I'm going back because this is what I just recently did. Isn't it interesting that it is in the 1837 edition, just 1 year prior, in the Book of Mormon, as he is beginning to re-emphasize his theology, he also begins to make just subtle little 1 and 2 word changes in the Book of Mormon, where he had said before on the deity aspects of God, he is one God. Now that's changed to, they are one God. Anyway, he changed it subtly so that there began to be a plural. Yes, yea, he is the very eternal Father. That was changed in the 1837. Yea, he is the very Son of the very eternal Father. And so this change here, you're saying in the history, it seems to me like it's exactly parallel to the changes he's taking across the boards in the Book of Mormon and perhaps the D&C. I don't know the history of the D&C as well, but so to me, really,
right. No, very, very interesting, very fun. It's super fascinating. And, this is even before we get into the sort of complicated history about the, composition of Isaiah 29, which is, in biblical studies is its own, complicated thing.
Animal, it is, yeah.
One of the fascinating things there is that while most scholars actually do think that the majority of Isaiah 29 comes from Isaiah of Jerusalem, so comes from Isaiah, as traditionally thought, those 2 verses that are so critical for the Book of Mormon, verses 11 and 12, are actually understood to be late post-exilic editions.
No, really, yeah.
So that is
let me read these verses real quick. And the vision of all has become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed, which men delivered to one that is learned, saying, read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I cannot, for it is sealed. And the book is delivered to him that is not learned, saying, read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I am not learned. So through textual analysis and perhaps textual criticism, like we've talked on before on this program, these are questionable verses now. I was not aware of that. So
it's not on text criticism itself, because all the manuscripts pretty much have those verses, but it's just through the analysis of trying to understand the composition history. 11 and 12 intrude on the surrounding text. It switches from poetry to prose. Right there, 11 and 12 are different. Just very different text. There are a lot of different arguments that scholars have made for that, and even some of the more scholars that kind of take a step back and say, okay, we can't just divorce everything from Isaiah. Isaiah 29 is Isaiah. Even those scholars have said, it's pretty clear that 11 and 12 are late additions to Isaiah 29.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. But it's still a marvelous work and wonder. That's what he says.
That is in 29. Yep.
Great.
Yeah. Right.
And that is quoted in the Doctrine and Covenants a few times.
I was going to say that actually becomes sort of the definitive theme in all of the early Doctrine and Covenants revelations.
It sure does. Especially section 4.
Yeah. And section 4 is a lot like, so that one's for Smith's father. A handful of the other early revelations are for Hiram, are for other, characters.
There for Orson Pratt and all that. Yeah.
Right. All of that kind of stuff. And so I'm not sure if there is one for Orson Pratt, but there are for a lot of the those who were there in 1829, 1830, 18, right at that moment, a whole bunch of those sections start. Isaiah 29 becomes that important to Smith.
Yes. Yeah.
His project.
He kept putting it into their minds. Absolutely.
Yeah. Marvelous work.
Well, I mean, if you're going to make it into a prophecy, right, about such a significant aspect of the work, go ahead and use the rest of it and pop it in there too as you can. That actually makes, I know that I'm not trying to come across as cynical here, but that actually makes really good sense of the, do I dare say, the misuse of Isaiah 29 as opposed to the use. I don't know.
Or whatever. I mean, it's there. It's Isaiah 29 is being put to rhetorical purposes, and those purposes. Those purposes are different from what the text of Isaiah is doing on its own. Scriptural texts are always put to new rhetorical purposes. That's by Scripture. And so, in this context, yeah, Joseph Smith is doing something different with it. He's reading Isaiah 29 specifically as a fulfillment of the Book of Mormon in general, of the movement that he's creating, but also of Martin Harris's travel to New York City.
And man, did that make Martin Harris cling on, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah. He's actually now in Scripture.
He
himself.
is a man in Scripture.
Yeah.
Boy, what a thing to go back and tell his skeptical wife, who theoretically was the one responsible for the destruction of the 116 pages.
She may or may not have been. I tend to agree with him, where she on her deathbed continued claiming, no, I had nothing to do with it. And so Martin Harris even believed, like, no, she never would have said that on her deathbed. If
Yeah. And speaking of 116, my dear friend Don Bradley wrote this book. It's a couple years now, but I'm finally getting it for Christmas. It's one of my Christmas presents. So, have you had a chance to read this?
I'm actually in the acknowledgments. So,
you know what, yeah. Colby, I think it was Don that told me to get a hold of you.
Oh, okay.
My shows. I think it was our friend Don. I'm going to try to get Don on in January.
Yeah.
I think it was Don. Anyway, yeah. Whoever it was, thank you. I'm loving having Colby. So,
yeah.
Well, thank you. Is there anything else you want to? I think that was the main thing. I was so fascinated when you and I were talking behind the scenes about Isaiah 29. You brought that up, and I go, "What? A year later? No!" And you said, "Yeah, actually, Carrie, he translated the Book of Mormon part a year after that." I had no idea. And here I was, an apologist for 14, 15, 16 years, and I was not aware of that kind of a detail. And yet those are important. So,
yeah. And just for understanding the history of the text, I think that's crucial. And just moving forward, this is just another one. People probably might disagree with this, and they might have other. That's totally fine. If they've engaged with the historical record, we can have some really fun conversations and move forward with that.
We can engage in texts.
Yeah, but I do think it is really crucial to take seriously the fact that the version of Anthon's conversation with Martin Harris that's in the 1838 account doesn't show up until 1838. It's not in any of the tellings earlier.
That is
the crucial detail that is different is almost the same exact experience as what happens with Michael Chandler, except that Michael Chandler doesn't tear it up. Michael Chandler didn't know how to translate Egyptian either.
No, he had no basis of even agreeing.
But he's a salesman, and he's
so interesting.
Yeah, and he's a salesman, and he's basically giving Smith a receipt and saying thank you, and like, I'm sure that this will support you and your work. But he gives him that, and Smith is able to see directly how much that little piece of paper could sort of give awe and inspire people as they're looking at the papyri. And he's telling them about his translations on the Book of Abraham, and all the plans that he had for a Book of Abraham, Book of Joseph, all of that kind of stuff. And it makes sense to me that that's sort of how things worked in history and developed as Smith continued to engage with other people on concepts of translation. And they got the word out that Smith was interested in those kinds of things, which is why Michael Chandler went to Kirtland in the first place. He'd been trying to sell those mummies. He heard Smith was there, and he knew that he might be interested, so it might be worth taking all these things over.
Now Chandler was also, I believe it was in Philadelphia. I got this from Dan Vogelan, the Method Infinite book. Mm-hmm. He actually was showing the mummies and the papyri in Masonic halls.
Okay.
And Masonry was strong in Joseph Smith's family, etc. I'm not trying to make too big a deal about that, but there's that connection with the mummies and the Masons and the ideas of prestige and importance and on and on and on. So it all interestingly comes around. So Colby, thank you. This was delightful. I actually opened my scriptures during this Sunday school lesson. So Sunday school lesson on a Friday. Woohoo.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, man. I love your insights. I love your enthusiasm and spirit of inquiry into into history, and some things do come off as rather, oh well, that's small, that's actually unimportant.
Mhm.
One or two things might be unimportant, separate,
Mhm.
but all of a sudden, if there's a connection, you go, oh
Yeah,
wait,
you have a
that
revelation.
now leads to this. And oh, wait, that didn't happen when I thought it did. It happened a year later. And now all of a sudden it's an avalanche instantly. And you're going, oh, wait, I've been seeing this wrong all this time. And now I really have to I love stuff like this. I can't help it.
Yeah,
So thank you for all your efforts. It's not thankless.
yeah. No, thank you too. I appreciate it. It's fun to
Absolutely.
chat about.
Pleasure. I'm looking forward to having you get on the show soon. So
Yeah.
in the meantime, take care of yourself, and to the audience, be good, do well, have fun, work hard, stay up late at night, only if you're having fun. And I do appreciate all your support and help. Appreciate all your love. We are going to head out of here, but we will return shortly.